Thank you.
I want to make sure I got this straight. You've stated today and in your report that about 4,000 Twitter employees are classified as engineers. Is that right?
Yes, sir. At the time, half the employees, I believe there were 7,000 plus full-time employees.
Got it. And that means that these 4,000-ish employees would have had access to live user data all over Twitter. They could access individual users' personal information, including their live data. Have I got that right?
Yes, sir. If they so they would have access to the production environment. If they spent the time to meander around and look around, they would find that they could access these large troves of data,
including geolocation data. Did you testify to that earlier today?
I know that Twitter has IP locations and that they do use geolocation services based upon IP addresses.
Wow, 4,000 employees with access to that data. That's extraordinary. So those employees would be in a position then, if they wanted to get this information and dox Twitter users. Is that fair to say?
That is a concern of mine, sir, yes.
Wow. That's a significant concern. 4,000 people with the ability to dox individual users who pick up the phone and use Twitter. That's extraordinary. Have you ever seen it happen?
I have seen numerous situations where Twitter engineers had to patch a problem, and I said, what was the problem? And they said, oh, engineers could tweet as anybody. The data was exposed in this part, and it was always reactionary rather in finding these wounds left and right and putting Band-Aids on them because the systemic underlying problems were not addressed, the broad access to too much information and too many systems.
When you say Twitter engineers could tweet as anybody, tell me what that means.
That meant a Twitter engineer understanding how the running systems and the data flows were operating could then access and inject or put forward information as I mentioned in my oral statement, any of the senators sitting here today.
And have you ever seen that happen?
No, not directly.
Not directly. Are you concerned it has happened? Do you have some reason to believe it may have happened?
The number of cases that were reported to me by individual engineers saying, hey, we found this, I'm going to try and have somebody fix it, where that was the exact problem and we wouldn't know if it had happened in the past, yes, I am concerned.
Wow. I think that's pretty significant testimony. Let me make sure that I understand also just this point. A Facebook whistleblower came forward a couple of years ago now, came to me, to my office, and told us that at Facebook they at least had some policies on the books that restricted back-end developers from using or from accessing user data. Now, whether or not those policies were ever followed, who really knows? But is it your testimony to me that Twitter had no similar policies in place that would have restricted these 4,000 engineers from accessing user data in this way?
Not technical enforcement, technical policies that were enforced. I did see basic policies such as, hey, you're not supposed to access inappropriate systems, but I also saw policies saying that your work laptops should only run in the following setups, and I was aware that I don't believe any of the laptops were in compliance with those policies.
None of the laptops?
Based upon the policy that I read, I do not believe any of the laptops were in compliance with that security policy.
Zero in compliance with their policy. That's extraordinary. Let me ask you about this. That same Facebook whistleblower told us a couple of years ago now that Twitter's content moderation staff routinely collaborated with content moderators at Facebook and Google. Is that true to your knowledge? Do you have any information about that?
That would be in a team under counsel, and I wouldn't have firsthand knowledge of that.
Are you aware of any Twitter policies that would have prohibited coordination on content moderation between Facebook, Google, and Twitter?
Not to the best of my knowledge, I am not aware.
Okay, so it's eminently possible, is what you're saying.
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you about this. Are you aware of any communications regarding content moderation with Twitter staff and the United States government in your time at the company?
I'm familiar of the conversations that happen through Department of Homeland Security, the traffic light protocol, where there are messages sent out to organizations about threats that maybe the FBI or other organizations had insight into.
So earlier this year, documents that we obtained from a different whistleblower at the Department of Homeland Security exposed that the disinformation board that the Department of Homeland Security set up, that first on the disinformation board's list of companies to meet with was Twitter. And they had an extensive memo which, by the way, is public information now. We've released it. You can go and look at it. But they had a memo prepared with notes for this meeting with Twitter, talking about cooperation in content moderation and, frankly, in monitoring Americans' speech. And now we know that thousands of Twitter employees have access to that. This was all in these documents. I guess my question to you is, and I know you weren't in those meetings, but why do you suppose that the Disinformation Board had Twitter first on the list of entities to come to talk about coordinating monitoring American speech?
I can't opine on that, but I can say that Twitter is a tremendously influential platform, and we do know that there are information operations being run on Twitter.
Do you think it's maybe because Twitter has proved so pliant to government pressure, to censorship and monitor people? I'm thinking of, first of all, the Hunter Biden story. We now know that Twitter killed the Hunter Biden reporting. We know Mark Zuckerberg has said that the FBI pushed Facebook to do so. Facebook throttled it down. Twitter killed it completely, locked up accounts that were trying to report on what we now know was a true story. Or how about in your own report, you claimed that the Twitter CEO proposed caving to the Russian government's demands to censor content on Twitter and spy on its users, and you noted that this occurred even as you were directing employees to prepare for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That sounds like an executive team that's pretty darn pliant to the demands of governments to weaponize effectively their platform to control information, to spy on its users. What's your view?
I wasn't there when the Hunter Biden issue happened, and I don't have any information on that. I wasn't briefed into it or involved in any of the investigations. The CEO was the CTO at the time when he proposed to me that, hey, what do you think about, why don't we just let Russia perform their own moderation? They're a democracy, so why shouldn't we let them do it? I didn't know what to think at the time. Then, sir, I was a little flabbergasted.
Well, I think I know what to think. Which is that Twitter has been all too eager to take private information from its users without telling them, to sell it and monetize it without their permission, to expose them to the worst kind of security threats, to censor them, to spy on them. I mean, you have painted a picture of a company that is not only out of control, but is truly in many ways a malign actor. And I thank you for being willing to be here and testify. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.